On a cold December night in 1969, as Mick Jagger strutted across the stage at Altamont Speedway, he had no idea that death lurked in the shadows.
On December 6, 1969, almost 300,000 people gathered at the Altamont Speedway in Tracy, California. The Rolling Stones were performing a free concert, envisioned to be Woodstock West. This event was meant to be a triumphant conclusion to the Stones' successful US tour.
The Rolling Stones, at the pinnacle of their success, had made a fatal miscalculation, trading the safety of hundreds of thousands for a few cases of beer. What began as the West Coast's answer to Woodstock would end in bloodshed, captured frame by frame on celluloid.
By the end of the concert, 4 people had died, including 18-year-old Meredith Hunter, who was stabbed to death by a Hells Angels member. This tragic event was captured in the Maysles brothers and Charlotte Zwerin's documentary film Gimme Shelter.
But the horror of Altamont was just the beginning.
BBC Radio says the Hells Angels plotted to kill Rolling Stones frontman Mick Jagger in 1969. The documentary will report that the biker gang was enraged with the decision to stop using its members as bouncers at Stones concerts.
Miles away, in the frigid waters of the Atlantic, a group of hardened bikers would soon plot their revenge against rock's greatest frontman. A revenge that would only be thwarted by the cruel whims of Mother Nature herself.
The Hells Angels planned to use a boat to get the Jaggers home on New York's Long Island. A storm overturned the boat and the plotters were tossed into the water. All survived, and there were no more attempts on the star's life.
This is a tale of rock and roll's dangerous dance with the underworld, where the lines between entertainment and outlaw justice blurred beyond recognition. It's the story of how the world's most famous rock band found themselves caught between the British taxman and American outlaws, and how a single decision nearly silenced one of music's most iconic voices forever. In the end, it would mark the death of the 60s peace and love ideology, and nearly the death of Mick Jagger himself.
The bikers loaded the boat with weapons, knives and guns. Tonight, the rock star who sold them out was going to die. The bikers threw everything they had into that boat, and the rock star, he slept soundly, unaware of the hell that was coming for him.
December 1969. The Rolling Stones were at their creative peak, having grossed over $10 million on their North American tour. Astronomical money for the time. Mick Jagger, the band's charismatic frontman, was facing a peculiar dilemma. The British government was demanding up to 90% of their earnings in taxes, money the band simply didn't have. It was a common problem for British rock stars of the era. Like John Lennon, who fled to New York, and David Bowie, who split his time between Berlin and Switzerland, the Stones found themselves in exile.
Britain was changing the way it taxed the very rich, and musicians like the Beatles, the Stones, and David Bowie owed up to 90% of their earnings. At the end of the 1960s, Mick Jagger was fronting the biggest rock band in the world. The Rolling Stones were at their creative peak, in the middle of one of the greatest 4-album streaks in music history. But the British government was coming after Mick for tax money that he didn't have, and there was an open contract on his life. The Rolling Stones were recovering from the death of founding member Brian Jones in July 1969.
They initially landed in the south of France, where they converted a mansion's basement into a makeshift recording studio. The band hadn't toured America since 1966.
The idea was that the free show was supposed to be a gift to Stones fans in the United States. The band hadn't toured America since 1966, mostly due to drug charges that made it hard for the band to travel.
Now they were planning their comeback, a free concert that would be the West Coast's answer to Woodstock.
And after missing out on playing Woodstock, the Stones decided to organize a West Coast Woodstock in San Francisco.
The lineup was impressive. The Grateful Dead, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, and Jefferson Airplane would all share the stage with the Stones. The original venue was supposed to be Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. Local law enforcement, however, had grown weary of dealing with the hippie crowds. With permits denied and time running short, the concert was hastily moved to Altamont Speedway, an hour outside the city.
It was put together in a very short period. Driven by both the Stones and the Grateful Dead, the concert was initially supposed to be held at San Francisco's Golden Gate Park, but the city rejected the proposal. Plans to host it at Sears Raceway in Sonoma fell through when the site owners demanded $100,000 upon learning the concert would be filmed. Finally, Altamont Speedway in Tracy was chosen.
That's when someone had what would prove to be a catastrophically bad idea. The Stones had previous experience with the British chapter of the Hells Angels. These were relatively tame bikers who had successfully provided security at the band's Hyde Park concert earlier that year. They'd even helped out during the memorial service for Brian Jones, the Stones' founding member, who had tragically drowned at age 27.
And the Stones knew the British version of the Hells Angels and who they were a bit softer around the edges than their US counterparts. And the British Hells Angels provided security at the Stones' free show at Hyde Park back in July a couple months prior, and at the memorial for Rolling Stone Brian Jones, who drowned dead by misadventure at only 27 years old.
But here's where cultural misunderstanding turned deadly. The American Hells Angels were an entirely different breed. By 1969, they had evolved from a motorcycle club into what law enforcement considered a sophisticated criminal enterprise. They weren't weekend warriors, they were outlaws with their own code of justice. The deal was simple: $500 worth of beer in exchange for keeping order at the concert.
And the Grateful Dead, these guys, vouched for the San Francisco branch of the Hells Angels.
The decision to hire the Hells Angels for security in exchange for $500 worth of beer had dire consequences.
To put that in perspective, the Stones were making millions, and they entrusted the safety of hundreds of thousands of fans to a group of bikers paid in alcohol. It would prove to be one of the most catastrophic decisions in rock history. December 6, 1969. An estimated 300,000 people descended on Altamont Speedway. The atmosphere was tense from the start. The Hells Angels, numbering around 800 members nationwide at the time, had positioned themselves as a human barrier between the crowd and the stage. They came armed with sawed-off pool cues and motorcycle chains, their chosen tools for crowd control. The violence escalated quickly. During Jefferson Airplane's set, lead singer Marty Balin tried to intervene in a scuffle and was knocked unconscious by a Hells Angel.
On the day of the concert, the Angels were violently aggressive towards the crowd, using pool cues. They even assaulted Jefferson Airplane's co-singer Marty Balin during his band's set when he tried to intervene in a fight.
Hey man, I'd like to mention that the Hells Angels just smashed Marty Balin in the face and knocked him out for a bit. I'd like to thank you for that.
Stephen Stills was stabbed in the leg with a motorcycle spoke. The situation was so dire that the Grateful Dead, who had vouched for the Angels, took one look at the chaos and refused to play, departing via helicopter.
It was such a mess that when the Grateful Dead, who recommended the Angels to begin with, got there, they heard about the state of things, they turned right around and they got the hell out. And that's them, leaving on a helicopter.
By the time the Stones took the stage after sundown, Altamont was balanced on a knife's edge. That's when 18-year-old Meredith Hunter, high on methamphetamine and armed with a .22 revolver, made his fatal mistake. The young man pulled his gun near the stage, and the Angels responded with lethal force.
Meanwhile, Meredith Hunter, a young black man who attended the concert with his girlfriend, was assaulted by the Hells Angels. In an attempt to escape, Hunter drew a gun, but was fatally stabbed by Hells Angels member Alan Passaro, who was later acquitted in court.
The murder was captured on film by the documentary crew, shooting Gimme Shelter. The Stones played on, unaware of the death that had just occurred mere feet from where they performed.
But the murder was caught on film. The Stones weren't making money off of tickets, but they were making money off of the film rights to the concert, which they sold. A documentary film crew shot the whole day and got footage of Meredith Hunter jumping into the air with a gun in his hands and immediately being dragged down by the Hells Angels. That footage would eventually be seen in the great documentary, Gimme Shelter.
Fire Night's End, the toll was devastating. 4 dead, countless injured, and the death of the 60s peace and love ideology captured on celluloid for posterity.
By the time the Stones got off the stage and crammed into their helicopters, Altamont had devolved into chaos. In the end, there were 4 dead, and the finger-pointing began immediately.
In the aftermath, the California music scene quickly distanced themselves from the Angels. Bands like Jefferson Airplane and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young blamed the Stones for poor planning. Keith Richards, the Stones guitarist, later remarked that except for a couple of incidents, the concert had been pretty good, a statement that would further enrage the Angels. The real issue wasn't just the violence, it was the film. The Stones had sold the film rights to the concert, and the footage of Hunter's death would be central to Gimme Shelter. The Angels felt betrayed when Jagger didn't defend them, and worse, when they learned the band had shared the footage with law enforcement.
Mick Jagger was messed up over the whole thing. He didn't step up to take the blame, and nor did he argue that the Hells Angels hadn't done anything wrong either. And for the Hells Angels, Mick's failure to clear them of blame was a betrayal. And pretty soon, news got around that the Stones had footage of the murder. Footage they'd already shared with the cops. They were planning to put on the big screen in their concert film in a couple of months.
By early 1970, Mick Jagger had retreated to Andy Warhol's estate in the Hamptons, Long Island. The British tax situation had forced him into exile, but it had also unwittingly placed him within striking distance of his would-be assassins. The word had gone out through the Hells Angels network. There was an open contract on the rock star's life.
All of the Hells Angels' anger over the blame placed upon them over the death of Meredith Hunter at Altamont, that anger, the Hells Angels focused it and their wrath on Mick Jagger. And the word went out. There was an open contract on the lead singer of the Rolling Stones. Mick Jagger was marked for death.
In a New York City biker bar, far from the California chapter involved in the Altamont incident, Angels gathered to plot their revenge.
The Hells Angels worked as security guards during a 1969 Rolling Stones concert in Altamont, California. A man was killed during a scuffle with gang members, and Butch testified that the Angels are furious because the Stones did not back them during the resulting prosecution of a gang member. He said the gang had sworn to kill Jagger someday. A spokesman for Jagger said, "This comes as a complete surprise."
The Brotherhood's code was clear. An attack on one chapter was an attack on all.
The Hells Angels felt that the Stones had left them high and dry following the murder at Altamont, thereby sullying the good name of their motorcycle club in the pages of every American news outlet. Now they wanted revenge.
The Hells Angels were one big, violent, dysfunctional family. If you stabbed one of them in the back, you stabbed them all in the back, or so went the thinking. And the bikers wanted revenge, but
Intelligence suggested that Jagger's Long Island compound was well guarded, with armed security patrolling the perimeter.
Mick Jagger went into seclusion in the Hamptons out on Long Island in New York, a continent away from the bloodshed at Altamont on America's west coast, and safe from the taxman in London, and well out of the reach of the California branch of the Hells Angels.
But these Angels noticed something the security detail hadn't considered. The property's southern edge, along the waterfront, was vulnerable. If they couldn't approach by land, they would come by sea.
They came up with a different idea. Jagger was staying in a house on the shore. Along the southern edge, there was a garden with no security. If the Angels couldn't get to Mick by land, they'd get to him by sea.
It might seem like a far-fetched plan, but remember, these were men who lived by their own rules. The weapons were easy to acquire. Guns and knives were abundant in Angel circles. A small dinghy was borrowed from along the South Shore. The assassination team loaded up their arsenal and set out into the Atlantic Ocean. It was December, and the winter wind cut through their leather jackets like razor blades. Navigation proved challenging. The shoreline mansions all looked identical in the darkness, and these were bikers, not sailors. They didn't notice the approaching storm until it was too late. The weather turned violent. Waves crashed over the small boat's sides, and finally, nature intervened. The dinghy capsized, sending men and weapons into the frigid waters. The Angels managed to swim back to shore, thoroughly humbled by their maritime misadventure.
It was December. It was freezing. Just weeks ago, there was an outdoor music festival in California, and now here these guys were, trying to keep out of the winter wind with their leather jackets. The wind picked up, and the bikers were having trouble keeping control of the boat. And when they looked to the shore, they couldn't really be sure which house Mick Jagger was staying at. All the fancy beach houses looked the same in the dark from the water. And the bikers may have been hellions on the road, but they were not lords of the sea. They didn't notice the storm. So with no boating experience and no navigational skills, they were making terrible time in the dark. And the storm overtook them. It came up from the east and caught them unprepared. And they hardly got their bearings before another wave hit, and it capsized the boat, dumped the bikers and their weapons into the ocean. The Hells Angels swam to shore.
The cold water had sobered them up enough to recognize the foolishness of their plan. They abandoned the hit, though the contract technically remained open.
And they're in the dumb boat. Can you imagine these big Hells Angels guys in this stupid little dinghy in this boat? And they're like, oh, damn, wait a minute, now, there's bad weather here. I know, wait. Boop, fell over. And they all fell overboard. And they climbed back on. They were all right. They didn't die or anything. They climbed back on to the coast, and they're like, oh, that was totally a bad idea, Jeans. Okay, never mind. The hit's off.
Jagger slept through the entire incident, unaware that Mother Nature had just saved his life. It wouldn't be until 2008, when an FBI agent finally revealed the full story, that the world would learn how close one of rock's greatest stars had come to meeting a violent end. The relationship between the Hells Angels and the music industry would never be the same after Altamont. By the 1980s and 90s, the Angels had shifted their focus to more profitable ventures. According to Senate Judiciary Committee testimony, they had become major players in the methamphetamine trade, with operations stretching from California to the East Coast.
Matt Pavoni of the U.S. Organized Crime Drug Task Force in San Francisco.
There is no other organized criminal group that has as much of an influence in methamphetamine manufacturing and trafficking as the Hells Angels, from what we know in law enforcement.
And the reason for that is?
The reason for that is, based on the number of investigations we've conducted involving methamphetamine trafficking, the group that shows up time and time again, particularly in the western United States, is the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club.
The numbers tell the story. In one case, Hells Angel Kenneth Owens was caught with 30 pounds of pure methamphetamine and $3 million in cash. Authorities estimated he had produced around 3,000 pounds of meth with a wholesale value of $30 million. Street value closer to $250 million. The Stones, meanwhile, continued their ascent. They launched their own record label and signed artists like reggae legend Peter Tosh. Jagger would go on to be knighted by Queen Elizabeth II in 2003, though he never again employed outlaw bikers for security. The truth about the assassination attempt remained hidden until a former Angel, nicknamed Butch, testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Under witness protection, he revealed the existence of the open contract and the failed attempt on Jagger's life.
There's always been more or less an open contract on this band and this person. And there's been 2 attempts that I know of that failed.
2 attempts at what?
To kill him. It's Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones.
When contacted for comment, Jagger's spokesperson said the revelation came as a complete surprise. Today, the Hells Angels maintain chapters worldwide, though their image has evolved. Some members can be found organizing charity rides or selling merchandise. Though law enforcement maintains this is often a cover for less legitimate activities. The 1969 casino brawl in Nevada that left 3 dead and 12 injured serves as a reminder that the old ways haven't entirely disappeared. For Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones, Altamont remains a dark chapter in an otherwise triumphant story. The band continues to tour and record, though they're more careful about their security arrangements these days. The episode serves as a stark reminder of a time when rock and roll truly lived on the edge, when the line between entertainment and outlaw culture blurred, and when a simple decision about concert security nearly changed music history forever. The story of Jagger and the Angels represents more than just a failed assassination attempt. It marks the end of an era when rock stars could dance with danger and walk away unscathed. Sometimes, as Jagger himself might say, you can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need, even if what you need is a winter storm to save your life.